You are now watching Man's Dark Nature, where true crime meets the truth behind the silence. Here we explore unsolved murders, recently reopened cold cases, and twisted domestic crimes that continue to haunt families and investigators alike. No jump scares, no sensationalism, just the dark, unsettling facts that the world will have you forget. Delivered through careful research and unflinching investigation. June 14, 2012. 14-year-old Brittany Shante Robinson walked into her father's Mobile, Alabama home excited about starting high school in the fall. She had already signed up for advanced placement courses. What Brittany didn't know was that she would never walk out of that house again, and that despite being the last person to see her alive, her father Dimitri Cooper would walk free for 12 years while the system designed to protect children abandoned her case to bureaucratic indifference. By June 22, Brittany's mother was filing a missing person report. By 2024, 12 years later, a grand jury would finally indict the obvious suspect, her own father. By 2025, that same system would fail her again when Hooper walked free from a courtroom, acquitted of her murder despite being the last person to see his daughter alive. What you're about to discover isn't just the story of a missing child. It's the story of how race, class, and institutional apathy can make a 14-year-old girl disappear twice, once from her father's house, and once from the priorities of a justice system that treats some victims as expendable. Brittany Shante Robinson represented everything the system claims to protect but consistently fails. A young black girl from a working-class family, caught between divorced parents in Mobile, Alabama, a city where racial and economic disparities have historically shaped how justice is administered. At 14, Brittany was preparing for her future. She had enrolled in advanced placement courses at Murphy High School, showing the academic ambition that should have made her disappearance a priority for every law enforcement agency. She suffered from severe asthma, a medical condition that made her disappearance even more urgent. Without her medication, she was in immediate danger. But Brittany had 3 strikes against her in a system that operates on unspoken hierarchies. She was black, she was poor, and she was caught in a custody dispute that authorities would later treat as a family matter rather than a potential crime scene. These factors would prove deadly when combined with institutional racism that has plagued missing person investigations for decades. The statistics tell the story the system doesn't want to acknowledge. Black children represent 37% of missing children cases but receive disproportionately less media coverage and fewer investigative resources than their white counterparts. When white children disappear, America mobilizes. When black children disappear, America moves on. Dimitri Cooper, Brittany's biological father, was supposed to be a brief visit on June 14, 2012. The custody arrangement suggested a strained relationship, but nothing in the public record indicated immediate danger. What investigators would fail to recognize for over a decade was that the most dangerous place for many children isn't with strangers. It's with family members the system trusts by default. The disappearance of Brittany Robinson wasn't just enabled by one person. It was enabled by a system that operates with predictable blind spots that predators understand and exploit. Dimitri Cooper may not have planned his daughter's disappearance in advance, but the systemic failures that followed created perfect cover for whatever happened in that McCavery Road home. The timeline reveals how quickly authorities dismissed what should have been their primary focus. June 14, 2012, Brittany arrives at her father's home for what was supposed to be a brief visit. June 15 to 21, 2012, 7 days of silence. No contact with friends, family, or anyone else. For a teenager with severe asthma, this alone should have triggered immediate intensive investigation. June 22, 2012, Brittany's mother files missing person report, 8 days after last confirmed sighting. June-December 2012, searches of Hooper's property reveal no evidence, but also no intensive forensic examination that would be standard in similar cases involving middle-class white families. What investigators failed to understand was that treating this as a runaway situation or family matter gave the primary suspect, the last person to see Brittany alive, 12 years to eliminate evidence, construct alibis, and benefit from fading memories and lost documentation. The systemic bias wasn't accidental. It was predictable. Missing Black children are statistically more likely to be classified as runaways rather than abduction victims, receiving less intensive investigation and media attention. This classification becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Less investigation leads to fewer solved cases, which reinforces stereotypes about the type of children who really go missing versus those who just run away. Hooper understood something that many predators learn: the system's prejudices can be weaponized. A missing Black teenager from a broken home wouldn't trigger the same response as a missing white child from suburbia. The very factors that should have made Brittany a priority, her vulnerability, her medical condition, her unstable family situation, instead made her invisible to a system operating with embedded racial and class bias. What happened to Brittany Robinson in her father's home on June 14, 2012, remains officially unknown, but the evidence of what didn't happen reveals a comprehensive investigative failure that enabled whatever crime occurred. The last confirmed sighting of Brittany was her arrival at Demetric Hooper's McCavery Road residence. After that moment, she vanished from every record, every contact, every trace of normal teenage life. For a 14-year-old who was preparing for high school, had friends, and maintained regular contact with her mother, this sudden complete disappearance was itself evidence of serious harm. Brittany's severe asthma made her disappearance even more urgent. Without her medication, she faced potential medical emergencies that could be life-threatening. This medical vulnerability should have elevated the case's priority and triggered intensive search efforts. Instead, it became another factor the system failed to adequately consider. The crime scene, Hooper's home, was searched, but not with the intensity that similar cases involving white children typically receive. No comprehensive forensic examination was conducted. No detailed analysis of digital communications, financial records, or movement patterns was performed in the crucial first weeks when such evidence is most valuable. More damaging was the failure to treat Hooper as the obvious suspect he was. As the last person to see Brittany alive, with exclusive access to her during the window when she disappeared, he should have faced immediate intensive questioning, surveillance, and investigation. Instead, the case was allowed to grow cold while the primary suspect remained free to eliminate evidence and construct alternative narratives. The physical evidence of what happened to Brittany was never found. No body, no murder weapon, no crime scene. But the absence of evidence became evidence itself of how thoroughly the system failed in those crucial first weeks and months when such evidence could have been discovered and preserved. The Brittany Robinson case represents a textbook example of how racial and socioeconomic bias translates into investigative failures that enable crimes and deny justice. For 12 years, obvious investigative steps were ignored, delayed, or performed inadequately while a child's disappearance faded from official priority. The immediate failures, 2012 to 2013. The Mobile Police Department's initial response revealed the systemic problems that would plague the entire case. Despite having a clear timeline, a known last location, and an obvious person of interest, the investigation quickly stagnated without the intensive effort such cases typically require. Searches of Hooper's property were conducted, but not with the forensic intensity that would be standard in similar cases involving middle-class white families. No comprehensive analysis of digital communications was performed. No detailed financial investigation was conducted to track Hooper's movements and activities. No systematic canvassing of neighbors and potential witnesses was undertaken. Most critically, Hooper was never subjected to the intensive interrogation and surveillance that should be standard when dealing with the last person to see a missing child alive. The investigation treated him more as a concerned parent than as a primary suspect, allowing him years to eliminate evidence and construct alibis. The systemic bias, 2013 to 2020. As the case grew cold, it revealed how missing person investigations operate with different standards based on the victim's race and class. The National Crime Information Center data shows that Black children represent 37% of missing children cases but receive significantly fewer resources and less media attention than white children. Brittany's case received minimal media coverage compared to similar disappearances of white children. No national advocacy organizations mobilized on her behalf. No persistent media pressure demanded answers from law enforcement. The absence of public pressure allowed the investigation to fade into bureaucratic neglect. The FBI's involvement was minimal compared to other child disappearance cases. No specialized task forces were formed. No significant rewards were offered. No advanced investigative techniques were employed that are routinely used in high-profile missing children cases. By 2020, Brittany's case had effectively been abandoned by the system. It joined the thousands of missing person cases involving minorities that gather dust in filing cabinets while resources are directed toward cases deemed more solvable or worthy of intensive investigation. The formation of a cold case investigation team eventually revived the case, but this was after a decade of evidence degradation, lost witnesses, and faded memories. The delay wasn't due to case complexity. It was due to institutional indifference masked as resource prioritization. When Hooper was finally arrested in Oklahoma in December 2023 on unrelated charges, it took outside law enforcement to inform mobile authorities of his location. This revealed that despite being the primary suspect in his daughter's disappearance, he wasn't even being monitored or tracked by the agency supposedly investigating her case. The eventual indictment of Demetric Hooper in February 2024 came not through competent police work, but despite investigative failure. After 12 years of bureaucratic neglect, the cold case investigation team finally presented the case to a grand jury, revealing both the strength of evidence against the obvious suspect and the inexcusable delay in pursuing it. The grand jury indictment, February 2024. The grand jury's decision to indict Hooper for murder was based on evidence that had been available from the beginning. He was the last person to see Brittany alive, she disappeared from his home, and despite extensive searches and investigations, no trace of her had been found for over a decade. The passage of time itself became evidence of her death. But the indictment also revealed what authorities had known but failed to act on for 12 years. While prosecutors haven't disclosed specific evidence, the grand jury's decision suggests that enough circumstantial evidence existed to establish probable cause for murder charges, evidence that could have been developed much earlier with competent investigation. The timing of the indictment, coming shortly after Hooper's arrest in Oklahoma on unrelated charges, suggests that the Mobile Police Department had effectively abandoned active investigation of Brittany's disappearance until external events forced renewed attention to the case. The delayed justice, 2024 to 2025. The prosecution's case faced the challenges that always result from delayed investigation. Witnesses had died or become unavailable. Physical evidence had degraded or been lost. Digital records had been deleted or become inaccessible. The 12-year delay had created the very obstacles that made conviction difficult. These challenges weren't inevitable, they were the direct result of institutional failure. Had the case been pursued with appropriate intensity from the beginning, physical evidence could have been preserved, witnesses could have been interviewed while memories were fresh, and digital records could have been secured before deletion. The prosecution was forced to rely primarily on circumstantial evidence. Hooper was the last person to see Brittany alive, she disappeared from his residence, and no credible evidence suggested she left voluntarily or was taken by anyone else. While this evidence pointed strongly toward Hooper's guilt, it lacked the physical evidence and witness testimony that competent immediate investigation might have developed. In June 2025, 13 years after Brittany Robinson disappeared from her father's home, Demetric Hooper walked free from a mobile courtroom, acquitted of her murder by a jury that deliberated for several hours before reaching their verdict. The acquittal. The jury's not guilty verdict reflected the prosecutorial challenges created by 12 years of investigative neglect. Without physical evidence, without Brittany's body, without the intensive investigation that should have been conducted immediately, The prosecution couldn't meet the burden of proof required for conviction. The acquittal wasn't evidence of Hooper's innocence. It was evidence of the system's failure to gather and preserve the evidence necessary to prove his guilt. The same institutional bias that delayed investigation for 12 years ultimately enabled his escape from accountability. The verdict revealed how investigative failures compound over time. What began as racial and socioeconomic bias in case prioritization became insurmountable obstacles to justice. The system failed Brittany twice, first by not protecting her from whatever happened in her father's home, and second by not conducting the investigation necessary to hold her killer accountable. The continuing failure. Hooper's acquittal doesn't mean the case is closed. It means the system has exhausted its ability to seek justice through criminal prosecution. Brittany remains missing, presumably dead, with no accountability for those responsible for her disappearance and presumed death. The civil justice system offers some potential for accountability, but the same evidentiary challenges that enabled Hooper's criminal acquittal will affect any civil proceedings. The family's options for justice have been severely limited by 13 years of investigative failure. More broadly, the case joins the thousands of missing person cases involving minorities that remain unsolved not due to lack of evidence, but due to lack of institutional priority. Brittany's disappearance could have been solved, her killer could have been convicted, if the system had responded to her disappearance with the same intensity it shows for missing white children. The Brittany Robinson case exposes how institutional racism operates in modern law enforcement, not through overt discrimination, but through differential allocation of resources, attention, and priority that predictably disadvantages minority victims. The system that failed to protect Brittany from whatever happened in her father's home also failed to seek justice for her disappearance and presumed death. The same biases that made her invisible as a missing child made her forgotten as a victim of crime. Until law enforcement agencies acknowledge and address the racial and socioeconomic biases that shape missing person investigations, more children like Brittany will disappear into the gaps between official priorities and bureaucratic indifference. The real crime in the Brittany Robinson case isn't just what happened to her, it's what the system allowed to happen by treating some victims as more expendable than others. 13 years after her disappearance, Brittany remains missing, her killer remains free, and the system remains unchanged in its willingness to abandon the most vulnerable members of society when they need protection most. Her case stands as an indictment not just of individual failure, but of institutional racism that continues to determine whose lives matter enough to merit intensive investigation and whose disappearances can be filed away and forgotten. The system failed Brittany Robinson. The question is whether it will fail the next child who depends on law enforcement to prioritize justice over prejudice, protection over convenience, and accountability over institutional reputation. The darkness reveals its secrets slowly, but it always reveals them. If this story found you in the shadows, subscribe and let me know in the comments. What truth do you think we missed? Until the next case goes cold, stay vigilant.